Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist payroll recruiters.
Hello and welcome to the Payroll Podcast. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Helen Hargreaves, Associate Director of Policy at the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, the day after the night before of the CIPP Annual Excellence Awards and Conference. Before joining the CIPP's policy team in April 2011, Helen worked for the HMRC for 27 years. Holding the MSc in Business and Payroll Management through Derby University, Helen's responsibilities with the CIPP include managing the policy team and the CIPP's advisory service, ensuring that the CIPP members have the information, skills and knowledge they need to keep up to date with the ever-changing payroll obligations. Helen is an accomplished writer for the CIPP magazine as well as external publications, and she will often be found attending consultation forums with different government departments, conducting consultation surveys and submitting payroll-related responses to various bodies. Truth be told, there are few payroll practitioners with more knowledge than Helen when it comes to the latest developments in payroll and its associated legislation. So I'm really delighted to have some time with her today after what was a fantastic awards evening last night to find out more about the issues affecting payroll today and how we might prepare for them. For those of you that are in attendance at the conference, we've covered a huge amount of material regarding the future of the payroll industry, and I'm going to speak to Helen today about a few of those things and try and expand on some new developments and legislation in more detail. So without further ado, welcome Helen to the Payroll Podcast.
Good morning, Nick. How are you this morning?
I'm very good. It was a slightly late finish at 4:30 a.m. and we're recording this at 10:15 a.m. So if my voice sounds a little coarse, that might be why. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I went to bed at 11.
Very sensible. Did you have a good evening?
It was a marvellous evening. It's been a really, really good event over the last 2 days.
It has. It's been fantastic. Well, I'm really, really delighted to have you on board. So first things first, Helen.
5 quick questions.
I wondered if you could just tell the listeners a little bit more about your journey to the CIPP and in particular how the experiences you gained within the 27 years you spent with the HMRC, how they supported you.
Well, when I worked in the employer team at the Revenue, our role was to champion the employer, but it's hard to convince others in the department you know what you're talking about.
Sure.
So it was agreed that I could be seconded to the CIPP for 12 months, spend lots of time with employers, really get a much better understanding of the issues that are affecting employers. The CIPP members were so welcoming. They invited me into their businesses, they invited me into the payroll department, they showed me everything that they had to do, all the burdens, all the convoluted processes sometimes that they had to do. When I went back to the Revenue, it was then my job to convince HMRC officials with some authority, really, that These are the problems that employers face in the real world, not just in what should happen in paper, but what actually happens out in the real world. So I went back to the Revenue for a couple of years. When I came back to the CIPP in 2011, in a way, it was the same thing in reverse, because then I could bring back from the Revenue into the CIPP what I knew about the Revenue. Because we all know the Revenue speaks a different language.
Yes.
And I understand that language. And I understand the thought processes that go on there. But as well, there are a lot of restrictions that HMRC is faced with that they're not allowed to tell us all, the reasons why they can't do that, even though it would make ultimate sense. And there are all sorts of things going on behind the scenes that I understand that as well. And so sometimes I think that having that understanding of both sides helps me walk that line in between the two and perhaps come up with solutions that hopefully HMRC can accommodate, but which still bring successful outcomes for employers.
So you can really understand the frustrations people have then from the payroll side, which is the side I hear about it more, trying to get hold of HMRC.
Yeah. When I hear those frustrations, I know without asking what the reasons are behind the scenes in the Revenue, but hopefully I can try and put forward suggestions that might overcome HMRC's restrictions behind the scenes. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, but at least I can see where they're coming from to see if we can find a way around it.
So before you joined the CIPP, when you were doing that sort of translation piece between the frustrations people had and then referring that back to the HMRC, were there any notable achievements or changes that came out of that work?
Not really, simply because I think everybody knows that things move very slowly in the Revenue. So I went back for a couple of years probably not really long enough. We might well be seeing the fruits of my labour now.
Okay.
But at the time, it's just a case of chipping away and showing that what happens on paper is really not what happens in the real world.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that it has done is possibly opened up the revenue to the idea of consulting and asking questions and not being frightened to do that, because what they're bringing needs to work in the real world. And ultimately, we all want the same thing, don't we?
So was that one of the attractions of the CIPP, as in you could make change happen a little bit faster?
Possibly. I can hope to do that. I've been around long enough to know that these things are slow-moving beasts.
Sure. Well, we know that one of the things you're really passionate about is ensuring that the CIPP and its policy team continues to be recognised as, I guess, the leading voice in payroll. The last 2 days at the conference have been a great example of this, but what else do you think can be done to help elevate the voice of the payroll professional?
As it stands at the moment, payroll is seen as a very operational role.
Sure.
And if you think about a business, employment costs are a significant portion of a business's expenditure.
Usually the greatest cost, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so why wouldn't you consider that at a strategic level?
Sure.
So what we need to do is try and get that payroll influence at board level. Now, it might be that they are represented at the board through the CFO or something like that. But what we need to do is we need to shift that route in through the CFO through just a purely operational route, and we need to raise our profile, payroll, and the data that payroll holds, because it is such a significant financial element there.
And we're definitely going to go into a bit more detail later about how we can do hopefully some of those things or some suggestions.
Yeah.
I know that for those listening that didn't make the conference or the awards, there were some really good talks that took place covering a range of subjects to robotic process automation, AI and everything else. Were there any sort of standout messages that you're aware of from the talks that you heard yesterday or you're involved in that perhaps you'd like to highlight, or any sort of implementable steps that perhaps should be considered by people who are listening to this podcast who want to stay ahead of the payroll curve?
I think there were two standout messages that came out of this year's conference. The first, unsurprisingly, is the uncertainty that Brexit brings. And so I want to reassure the people listening to this podcast that weren't at the conference yesterday, don't worry, we didn't all get the answers to Brexit, and you've not missed out on that.
Don't really know what's happening yet anyway.
No, exactly. But what there was through several sessions at conference was a clear message that businesses need to start Brexit-proofing their businesses now.
Sure.
The fact that we don't know how we are going to leave the EU, we don't know whether we're going to get a deal or a no deal, but there are still some steps that people can take now to start planning ahead for whichever way that goes.
It's not an excuse for no reaction.
Absolutely. The key messages that came out were if businesses start planning now, start assessing the workforce. Have you got any EU nationals? They need to make sure that their status is registered, and you need to start planning to work out what you would need to do for either of those scenarios. The second, I think, is about the changing workforce and the changing demands that workforce are making. Millennials are demanding a lot more flexibility about when they work, where they work, how they work, even how they're paid and when they're paid. And employment status and gig economy, they're really focusing businesses to assess how they can accommodate these demands. Some workers are even wanting to be paid as soon as they've completed the work, rather than waiting until the end of the week or the month that's in line with the usual conventional pay frequencies. In fact, one presentation that I sat in told us that some Uber drivers could ask to be paid up to 5 times a day.
Wow.
Can you imagine incorporating that into your existing payroll practices?
Well, I think, for those that may not be familiar, but with new technologies coming in like blockchain, potentially some of these technologies might enable us to have pay whenever we choose to have it. It could be paid by the minute, by the hour, by the day. We've got some new businesses, I think WageStream, of changing the way they do things at the moment. An interesting model.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it must be quite a big risk model there, but it's interesting how things are changing. And I did a talk with Vicky at the conference, and we talked about social media, but one of the things that we discussed was the death of email.
Yeah.
Because Generation Z don't use it. I can't imagine a payroll world without it at the moment, but the reality is Generation Z communicates solely on messenger apps, LinkedIn Messenger, WhatsApp Messenger and things like that. we have to start catering towards Generation Z and millennials now.
Absolutely.
So they're going to be the workforce of the future.
Absolutely, they are. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's good. There were some really good talks, and the Uber one was actually one I missed, but it sounds like it would have been
It was very, very good.
Part of.
Yeah.
Like, for those, it must be difficult. If you weren't at the awards ceremony, I do recommend coming next year. It was a really, really fantastic event. It was amazing for me to see so many payroll professionals and, of course, service providers get recognised for the great work they do on a day-to-day basis that, we all know sometimes isn't always as appreciated as much as it could be by businesses, and yet we think it should be because, as we know, it's one of the most expensive functions of any business, and a real opportunity for payroll professionals to improve the bottom line of any business if it's run well. In your view, do you think payroll professionals get the recognition they deserve within businesses?
Not nearly. And there is this cliche, all payroll do is push a button, and it feels a bit trite.
Sure.
Bringing out this same cliche, but actually it's true. This is the perception out there that all that payroll do you need to do is just run the payroll once a month and that's it, job done. How many times do the payroll team ever get thanked for getting the pay right? Never. And to be fair, they wouldn't expect it because they're just doing the job, and that's what you come to work to do.
Yes.
Just do your job, get it right, and that's it. But no one ever thinks about payroll unless something goes wrong.
Sure.
They never think about all those times when, no matter how many times overtime or whatever they've worked and their pay is right to the last penny, got the money on time and it's all right. It's only ever pops into someone's consciousness when something goes wrong, and then all of a sudden the payroll team comes into focus, and there's that perception that payroll just happens magically until it goes wrong, and then all of a sudden it's someone's fault.
Sure.
That's what we need to overturn.
Where do you think that perception comes from? Do you think it's driven by a board level, finance? Do you think it's driven by HR? Do you think it's, where do you think that perception's come into play? Because it's been there ever since I've done it. I've been doing this for 17 years. It's always been the perception that they just press buttons. But where do you think it originated from?
Well, to be honest, I don't know, because it's not that long ago that there were no buttons to push, because it used to just...
it was all manual.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I've got absolutely no idea where it comes from. Maybe it's because payroll do have a tendency to just get the heads down and get on with the work, and they don't make any big song and dance about the complexity of the work that they do. They just actually get on with the job.
I think there's an assumption as an employee as well. It's just something, because it's your pay, and it's something people are so sensitive about. And of course, if it's wrong, it has potentially have a real dramatic knock-on effect in your personal life outside of work. It's one of those things that when you've done your work for a week or a month, you just expect to have it right.
Absolutely.
It's the last thing you expect to be incorrect when you open it up and you've got things budgeted for. So it kind of almost breeds into that mentality of, well, it should be right. Surely this is easy to do.
Absolutely.
I've done my job. This should be easy for you.
Yes.
And actually, they've no idea of the mechanics behind what goes into that place.
No. And every year it gets more complex.
Yes.
And yet it's still expected to be right and on time.
And you think this new technology makes things more streamlined potentially, but that's because legislation is getting more and more complex. It doesn't make the payroll job necessarily easier, because it's getting harder. So as Associate Director of Policy at the CIPP, it would be easy for people to think that your role is only focused on matters concerning complex payroll legislation, which we just discussed. It is, of course, much wider than that. In particular, there's a lot of talk about robotic process automation, or RPA, blockchain, chatbots, and AI. What does your research tell you in terms of what you think will be the key technological trends that perhaps payroll leaders should be preparing for, that, I guess, in the short term could have the biggest impact on the payroll professional over the next, say, 12 to 48 months?
There's so much out there, and it's hard to identify which ones of these new technologies are going to fly and which ones are going to drop off. Your technology happens like that all the time. So I've focused on two, really, that I think are likely to stay around. The first is blockchain. With the increasing focus on protecting data, I mean, especially with GDPR, it's really coming to everybody's focus as well. And it's made people realise just how vulnerable data is. I mean, there's all these data breaches that are on the TV now, and they really make, and they're always the big names as well.
You wonder if they've always been this many breaches, but there was just never any need to publicise
Exactly, it does make you wonder that. So I'm not technically minded. I can't even say it, so I'm obviously not technically minded. But as I understand it in layman's terms, blockchain enables data to be split up into small little blocks. And if an attack happens or a hack happens, the data in that one little block is useless on its own. You need the whole chain to be able to make sense of that data. And that does seem like a technology that is going to be so useful moving forward once people realise what it is and how it can benefit them and how it can protect them from what seems to be an increasing number of cyber attacks.
We're kind of in the old school days of computing, I think, for blockchain, when the first computer was made and it took up a whole room.
Yeah.
And everyone knew it was going to revolutionise it, but it was so big that no one could afford it and no one could implement it because you just needed the most basic computing power took a whole room to build. I thought that's why we are blockchain. At the moment, it's too powerful, it takes too much of an energy resource, and there are too many issues around it. It's not quite ready for, in my view, adoption yet. But once they get that smaller and advanced and becomes the size of a UBS stick, it's going to be everywhere.
And in our recent Future of Payroll survey, we asked the question of our members, because it is still in its very early stages. So we asked them, have you ever heard of blockchain? And only 16% of the respondents said that they'd heard of it. And 14% said they thought that they might be likely to use it in the future. Now, it's not really surprising that only 14% thought that they would use it if only 16% had heard of it. But actually, those two numbers are actually quite close. Well, those that had heard of it, it looks like most of them thought that in the future...
An interesting question would have been for me, of the 16% or even the 14%, how many of those could explain what it is?
Yeah.
And it'd probably be 1%.
Absolutely.
It is a bit of a... difficult as a concept. I've done a series of articles on LinkedIn for those that want to have a read about it. There are already blockchain payroll companies out there working, particularly in the fintech, Silicon Valley and places like that. So it is going to happen. It's already happening, but it's slow moving at the moment.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
What I'm interested in is how quickly it does take off. You've given the idea of between the next 12 to 48 months.
Yes.
It's something that we're going to follow up in our future surveys to see, how this changes as we move forward.
And do you think we'll ever pay people in cryptos?
Who knows? Because when I started work, you did still used to get a proper paper envelope with real life money inside.
Yeah, sure.
And I could never imagine anything different to that. That does make me sound like I'm about 104. But, things just move on so much, so I'm not really in the best position to be able to say one way or the other on that one. The other thing that I think that payroll departments need to really get their head round, and I think it's a really difficult concept for people to work through, is this pay on demand.
Okay.
But we know with this increasing gig economy, the flexibility of working hours, that more organisations are coming onto the market that will allow workers to request payment when they want it. Now, I know from a payroll point of view, there's all sorts of concerns, about reporting to HMRC on or before the date of payment. If you've got 5 payments in one day, holy moly, that's going to potentially create all sorts of headaches, but then that's when you need the technology to come in and help manage that for you. We've also got to think about how that might link in with universal credits, which of course are adjusted according to the amount of pay that someone receives. So it's not just working out how things can evolve in the payroll world. We've also got to make sure that the government departments can keep up, and that
are the solutions that algorithmic, if that's the word? Are they algorithms that just need to be developed to allow it to do real time, or is it more complex than that?
I'm not technically minded, so I suspect that the answer is yes. That normally when you speak to a software developer, they will say, we can do anything that you want us to do.
Sure.
So I like that answer.
It's getting the rules right in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And getting those rules and those specifications out from government, because it's always government that sets the specifications and then software works to it. When you've got this outside factor of the workers saying that I want something when I want it, well, then that's got to work in with the government and with the software as well. So I do think that it is going to evolve. I do think that it will become much more commonplace, but we really need to get the concept into our minds of how exactly it can work to still fulfil all these obligations that the revenue places.
I'm still a little bit on the fence with the whole pay on demand concept. I know that it's been some of the business, I mentioned one of them earlier, who are already offering this kind of service. But for me, I understand that the mentality of millennials or Generation Z going, well, I work that day, so I should have the moment I want it. I don't need, why should I have to wait when I've already done the work? I understand the concept from that side, but I think there's potentially bigger ramifications behind the idea of budgeting. And if you're getting it all the day, as soon as you've earned it, you've spent it, you lose that ability to budget properly. Yep. It could tie into some debt-related issues, in my view.
I completely agree. And this is something that I've been saying. The concept behind pay on demand is financial well-being and caring for your workers and whatever. Yes. And I just keep thinking, but if they get paid a week early, because some people were saying, they run out of money before they run out of month. Yeah. So they need payment a month early. And you think, but then surely that means that then they'll run out of money 2 weeks early in the next month. And with that, and financial wellness and financial well-being, I think need to be given deeper thought than just on the surface.
I totally agree. Yeah. I think there's potential issues there, and it's interesting. We'll see how it develops.
Absolutely, yeah.
Einstein famously said that insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We believe it's time to try a new approach to recruitment. JGA Recruitment specialise in recruiting the top 15% of payroll and HR talent using innovative 24/7 attraction strategies that are proven to improve quality of hire, candidate retention and return on investment. De-risk your recruitment process today and hire better talent faster with JGA Recruitment. Visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
So, having previously worked for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or HMRC, do you think it's about time that, from that perspective, it had some proper ministerial oversight? I say that because at the moment it doesn't, and I think there's a potential issue that exists at the moment, from what I hear in terms of feedback from payroll managers, where the buck doesn't really stop anywhere, and that therefore can be sort of a hindrance to progress. Why do you think they don't have any ministerial oversight? And in your view, if something does go wrong at the top level, where does the buck stop?
To be honest, I think that there will be a lot of listeners out there that are surprised to hear that HMRC isn't a government department in its own right, in the same way that the Department for Work and Pensions or the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, you just automatically put it in the same category, and it isn't. It's a no-ministerial department, but it does come under the jurisdiction of Mel Stride, who's the Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Yeah. Now, when we have consultation meetings with the revenue, a lot of the time they say to us that they are awaiting ministerial decisions. So there are ministers there, are ministers with an interest who are the decision makers. It's just not quite as clear cut as the Department for Work and Pensions or BEIS. There's a very strange, in my opinion, relationship between HMRC and the Treasury, because you would sort of think that there would be that natural fit there between the revenue and the Treasury, but very often that when they run consultations, they run them jointly, and each department is looking at things from a different angle and has a different focus, and perhaps sometimes hoping for a slightly different outcome.
Having worked on that side of the fence, is it quite siloed like that?
I don't think that there's a very close working relationship between the revenue and the Treasury, unless there is a specific project where they come together and then they will do joint consultations. But interestingly, then at the consultation meetings, you will get Treasury officials there and you will get the revenue officials there, and they're speaking with regards to their own department rather than
they don't get together beforehand to come up with a united message.
Perhaps they do. If they do, well, then they hide it.
That's interesting. Okay. So do you think then the HMRC are liaising enough with the leaders in the industry, such as yourself, to help progress the profession?
Yes, I do. Consultation is still seen by some areas of HMRC as just a box that you've got to tick to say that you've done it, and then you can go on and do whatever you wanted to do anyway. But that's not the case in a lot of the department. And coming through from the top now as well, there appears to be a real drive to work with key stakeholders. I mean, one message that we've been saying with the directors that we've been meeting is we understand that resources in HMRC are stretched.
Sure.
They've got an extra resource in stakeholder groups who can help them and work with them, and if they trust us, then we can work with them to hopefully achieve something that's going to benefit us all. Because whenever you want to bring something in, you want it to be brought in with as least admin burden as possible, and to be as streamlined as possible to ultimately give the revenue and its ministers exactly what it is that they're wanting to achieve. So it's a win-win all round if they trust us and use us. And in recent months, Ken Puller, the CEO of the CIPP, has been invited to several meetings with leaders in HMRC, along with other leaders of key stakeholder
that's
groups.
Positive.
Exactly. To seek their views, to seek their advice and insight into key areas that could relieve pressure on employers, thoughts on where we could go, how the limited resources of HMRC could get the biggest impact for the least book, if you like.
Well, that's good. That's good news. It sounds like I'm being hard on the HMRC here. I don't necessarily mean to be, but so if we flip it and play devil's advocate slightly, do you think that there are enough payroll managers, and we've seen hundreds of payroll managers at this conference the last couple of days, do you think there are enough payroll managers having a willingness to get involved in forums? Do you think they know how to get involved in consultations? And is there a clear route to market for those that want to?
The consultation forums, usually with a representative body.
Sure.
At the CIPP, we are really, really clear that if I attend a consultation meeting, what Helen Hargreaves thinks is totally irrelevant. It's what the payroll profession thinks. It's why we do so many surveys. It's why we get out and talk to people who are actually doing the job, feeling the pain, because it's what they think that matters.
Do you feel you get enough engagement at the moment? Because in any industry, you have people that go, well, I want this changed, but actually I'm not going to be the one to do anything about it.
Payroll, we've already said, is increasingly complex, and we do understand that people are under a lot of time pressures. We do try and encourage everybody, if you can spare time, we usually give an expectation of how long a survey will take to complete, why it's important that you would do it, because we try and time it with pay cycle runs and this kind of thing.
That's interesting. It's basic thinking that I didn't even see behind the scenes.
Absolutely, you've got to do that. And a lot of the time we understand that it can be difficult for people to do that. But I have seen how this can actually work in practice. It's a few years ago now. It stunned me so much that I'm still talking about it even now, a few years later. About 2 or 3 years ago, there was consultation fell out of the OTS to look at expenses and benefits, and they brought 4 consultations out that all came out together. We created these 4 surveys, encouraged our members to fill out these surveys, tell us exactly what they think would work, what wouldn't work. Whilst the surveys were open, whilst the consultation were open, HMRC called a consultation meeting. Various people went. I downloaded our survey results to date. The surveys were still open, but
the timing was perfect.
Absolutely. And whilst we were around the table, once it became clear that I wasn't just talking about what Helen Hargreaves thought, but I'd got evidence of what was going to work for payroll and not. They were changing their thoughts as the meeting progressed. And we got to the stage where they're saying, Helen, what do your members think? And it's that power, that people power, that really, really can, not always, I'm not that naive, but can have an effect. And one thing that our members are really starting to embrace is the policy think tanks that we hold. So various topics either coinciding with a consultation that's been published, or even just something that we know is on the radar with a government department. We literally have not literally a round table, because normally it's an oblong table, isn't it, where we've shoved all the desks together, but we have people sitting around a table. We want to keep it that small because that encourages debate and allows everybody to have their say. So up to about 20 people with members of that government department that have responsibility for that policy, that they're wanting to shape that policy. We introduce them to each other. The policymakers can talk to the people on the ground and find out exactly the number of times that I've heard that question, but why do you do that? That then gives them that greater understanding. Exactly. And we try and run the think tanks up and down the country, not just London-centric, and more government officials are willing to travel out of London so that we can really meet the members, and that is something that is growing in popularity.
I guess if you are getting your next survey through, if you don't follow it, it's kind of it's an old adage or an old cliche, but if you don't respond, you're voting for no change.
Absolutely. Or you've just got to live with what everybody else has said.
Yeah. So 4 or 5 minutes of your time, it's worth getting involved.
Absolutely so, yeah.
I want to try and move the podcast on to find out a little bit more about you, Helen, if we can.
Time to find out more about you.
So, how would your friends describe you, and how would your work colleagues describe you?
Well, I confess I thought this question might come up, and genuinely I had no idea what my friends and my colleagues might think of me, so I thought, okay, I'll ask them.
Fair enough.
Oh, well, that backfired, because what I said was, what would you think about me? Don't feel that you've got to say anything nice. The derogatory comments are normally the funnier ones anyway, so let's go with that. But despite me telling them not to be nice, they came back with nice things, and then ended up looking like I was fishing for compliments, which doesn't really work when we're looking at this. But there was a common theme from every single one of my friends, and that was that I was fun, bubbly, and never so slightly bonkers.
Oh, that's nice. That's good.
Really? But then coming back from my colleagues, not the same words came back, so I'm not sure what to think about that. There was a common theme: honest, friendly, a little bit mad. There's that word again, but a couple of the colleagues did say something different. So one said that I was a good egg, and the other one came back with one word: I'm Yorkshire. So let's be a good Yorkshire egg. We'll settle for that one.
Perfect. Well, listen, prior to this, I asked, I told a colleague of mine, I won't mention on the podcast, but I said, I'm doing a podcast with Helen Hargreaves, and their response was, you'll love it. She's full of energy, it'll be entertaining, it'll be great. And I said, it's good. So similar kind of comments.
Yeah, but can we go for informative as well as entertaining?
And informative, of course. I want to get into the legislative information coming up soon, which is great. So tell me something then about you that perhaps other people don't know about you.
I was once in a Bollywood movie.
Wow, okay.
Not a starring role, obviously, but we did appear in a Bollywood movie as extras.
As extras. Do you have a passion for acting on the side, or is this...
No, and given that, all we were supposed to do was walk along a beach behind a lot of Indian dancers, because the Bollywood movies are spectacles of dancing and singing. All we had to do was walk behind them, and it took about 5 takes because we were either too fast, too slow, not walking at quite the right angle. How hard can it be to walk across the back of a group of dancers?
So you're on IMDb?
Unfortunately not. I don't even know what the movie's called, but we're in there somewhere.
Well, we'll look up those watching Bollywood movies, keep it out in the background.
Absolutely. Yes.
So you're abducted by aliens who want to learn more about our species.
Yes.
What item would you take with you? Chocolate. Great answer.
How could they not love me after I plied them with chocolate? And if they're not chocolate lovers, well then that's fine, because I'll just eat it.
Do you have a personal fave?
I'd love to say yes, but I'm not that discriminate. I just like...
Well, you're like me. No, fair enough.
Absolutely.
It's definitely my guilty pleasure as well, I think. What game or instrument would you teach them?
A few weeks ago, we had a team night out, and we played a game called Dobble, which I have never heard of in my life. Dobble. It's like a hyped up version of Snap or Happy Families or something, really, except that on each card there's about 6, 7, 8 different symbols, and you can match any one of those symbols. An absolute hoot. We were sort of in danger of perhaps being asked to leave because we were being a bit loud. But you can tell that we're all women of a certain age because we got to the stage where we couldn't see the symbols on the cards without having to put our glasses on first.
That might be a game you have to teach me as well as the aliens. I've never heard of it either. I'll have to check it out. What would you tell them about humans?
Now time for a little bit of depth. I would say that would tell them that to err is human. We all make mistakes.
Right. So with that in mind then, what human trait would you hold back?
I would not tell them that we lie.
Oh, so there you go. Very clever as well. Fantastic. Excellent. Well, I want to get back into the legislation side of things.
Okay.
5 quick questions.
It's obviously where you are very experienced and are a genuine expert, one of the leading experts in the UK on the subject. So I mentioned in the introduction that you've written many articles for the CIPP magazine, as well as a number of other external publications. I've read some of these as well. In particular, I read a recent article regarding Class 1A national insurance contributions on termination payments, which we now know will not be reported through the FPS for 2019-20, but the government will still impose liabilities on the taxable portion of a termination payment. So with no implementation date set for this, what guidance do you think is needed to help employers navigate through this process, both for the interim and the longer term?
The meeting that we're at, the consultation meeting where it was confirmed that we wouldn't need to use the FPS for 1920, everything that they use, that was the only definite that came out. Everything else from that was likely or expected or
still up in the air
everything
slightly.
like that. Yes. That being said, everybody round the table did make it very clear that what we need is to know now what the plans are. So even if they are going to bring in Class 1A national insurance on the termination payments for 1920, if they're going to do that, and we know it's not going to be a real-time deduction, so it wouldn't need to be reported until July 2020. We were begging HMRC, do not think that because that's 18 months away, you don't need to make a decision now.
Sure.
We need to know now. Software has to accommodate it, and the software for 1920 is being issued in the next couple of months.
The software providers, they put pressure on you or on...
They were software developers are in the room as well.
They're in the room as well?
Yes,
okay.
And we all stood together for...
United front.
Absolutely.
Great.
And the people in the room really then understood the time frames that are needed.
Sure.
So, yes, we talked about, do we need these decisions and we need them as soon as possible. But when we get them, we also need proper, clear, comprehensive guidance, ideally that they've shared with us in advance on a confidential basis to sense check it, to make sure that sometimes what guidance has a habit of doing is telling people what the revenue or DWP or whoever else, what they want us to know, instead of actually fulfilling the need for what employers really needed and wanted to know themselves.
The sense checking makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I'm honest, I think that message was clearly received. And we're hopeful it's not within their gift because we're waiting for ministerial decisions, but hopefully we will get what we need. And because it's not going through the FPS, hopefully we'll get it in time and it will.
Watch this space.
Absolutely.
Or follow your updates, because I know that obviously you're quite vocal on your LinkedIn profile. There's some good articles on this as well. So for those that haven't seen Helen's LinkedIn profile, if you want to find out more about this particular article and other articles, it's worth checking in and following those. There was another article actually on LinkedIn that you wrote recently regarding the PAYE tax gap. And good news is it's come down. It's smaller. It's come down from 7.3% in 2005, 2006, when measuring began, to just 1.1%, which is about 2.9 billion in remuneration terms, as a percentage of PAYE liabilities in 2016, 2017. So while I'm sure the RTI must be accountable for some of this closing of the PAYE tax gap, what I'm more interested to know is, do you think that this gap reduction is also down to the fact that payroll professionals are more skilled than ever, which I think they are, and they've had to be, and they've upskilled themselves, in ensuring employees are paid both accurately and on time?
Whenever I see these tax gap figures, I'm just always so proud of payroll professionals, because pay as you earn is one of the biggest contributors to the exchequer.
Sure.
We generate the most money, and yet the tax gap is one of the smallest across all the taxes. And yes, of course, RTI has played its part in that. You can't take away from that. But the main overriding factor in this, in my opinion, is the responsibility that payrollers feel towards the people that they pay.
Sure.
And it's their workers that suffer if payroll does not do things properly. Paying people accurately and on time is what drives payroll to make sure that they've got the knowledge that they need to achieve it. Our market insight survey shows that the most widely used and popular member benefits are the ones that provide information. The advisory service, the daily or weekly news emails, the payroll fact card, the magazine. Without shadow of a doubt, the top benefits most used are those that allow people to get the information they need to do the job. And keeping up to date with legislation, knowing what the obligations are, how to fulfil them. Every year there's additional complexity. Every year they throw something else in. And to be honest, you can sort of see why, because it doesn't matter what they throw at payroll. Somehow or other,
handle it.
We deliver.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there has to be that natural consequence that people are continually educating themselves, keeping up to date with everything that they need to do to make sure that they can fulfil those obligations.
Fantastic. I think it's a really great answer, because for those payroll people out there that are concerned about some of the technologies coming in, we talked about RPA and the potential of roles being automated. You've just given a number of reasons as to why you can't automate the role of the strategic payroll professional. They have a much bigger role to play in employee engagement, in keeping that tax gap reduced, staying on top of complex legislation. There's a whole wealth of reasons as to why the role will not be automated. And just to reaffirm, the things that will be automated will be tasks and potentially some of the data input level tasks.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
For those listening to this podcast, data inputting people, in my view, aren't really payroll people anyway. It's a totally different thing.
Absolutely.
And we need to make that distinction. So really good answer. That's good. What do you think payroll leaders need to be doing in order then to stay ahead of the profession?
I would say that the world is ever changing, and it's really important that payroll leaders keep up to date with all those changes, whether that's new and advancing technology, or whether it's that shifting role that payroll can play within a business, moving it from purely an operational process to the strategic role. Such a huge amount of data that a business could start to mine into and use it to their advantage. So I would suggest that what payroll leaders have to do is exactly what you've just said. Embrace that technology to deal with the more mundane tasks, so that then what they can do is free up the staff to deal with those other more complex elements.
We're definitely on the same page there.
We are indeed.
That's good news. Then from your perspective on the policy side of things, what are the key legislative changes that you're expecting updates on right now? And how do you think these are going to impact payroll departments in the near term?
I would say that you've been here at conference for the last 2 days, and throughout nearly every session there's been the underlying review of modern working practices that was undertaken by Matthew Taylor, and it comes out in so many different ways, whether it's employment status or the workers' rights. All those kinds of things are going to be impacting government and businesses, and it's not going to be short term, because there's so many things looking ahead in the future as well. And these things are very, very subtle. It's not going to be a big bang approach where everybody will know that it's coming in. So payroll really needs to keep their eyes open, because if workers' rights change subtly and employment status is a much more focus going on that. We know that we're looking at the off-payroll workers as well, which is also linked into employment status. Everything is interlinked, it feels at the moment, in a huge piece that is going to affect lots of different government departments, businesses on all sorts of levels. The link between payroll and HR is becoming greater than ever before.
I think you've highlighted with the employee engagement, some of the things you raised there. An HR person will go, actually, that's in my realm, employee engagement. And,
and we need to make sure that we work with HR, not siloed, to make sure that we're all working the same way.
I think also we're influenced more now in what is a very social world of communication by what happens globally. So if there is a change in another country that's working, it's quite likely that we'll start seeing it being implemented. To keep your eyes open.
Absolutely.
I think it was only this morning I read a headline news following the gender pay gap, but now they've recognised there's a big disparity on the racial pay gap. So again, if that's being explored, it's likely that's going to impact payroll at some point in the future.
Absolutely, yeah, because the consultation came out yesterday for ethnicity pay gap, yes. Yeah, and there will be considering disability pay gap as well moving forward.
Sure, and again, you start instinct with HR again. It's all really, really close. Fantastic. So, last question before we open the vault. If you could summarise your view of the role of the CIPP within the payroll profession, what would it be, and what do you think could be done to ensure that the Institute continues to be seen as the leader, if you like, in terms of how the industry is shaping the future of payroll?
The CIPP's Royal Charter means that we work on behalf of the whole of the payroll profession. And as part of that, we encourage collaboration. We need to make sure that we all work together to make sure that collectively we achieve what's best for the payroll industry. It's important that we don't just collaborate within the payroll industry, because we've already just mentioned about the link with HR. So, collaborative working with CIPD. Only this week, I've just recorded a webinar with ACAS. And, it's important that we work together, because we all ultimately are wanting to achieve the same things, and it's much better that we achieve that. More likely to achieve success if we all work together.
And actually, speaking openly, there was evidence of that at the awards yesterday, because I have friends at the Learn Centre who are here, I have friends at the GPA who were there, and everyone's kind of communicating and working. And we all have the same common goal, which is hopefully to evolve and push forward and the payroll industry and elevate it, which is fantastic. So we're going to open the vault.
Entering the vault.
One piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now?
I would say that payroll legislation and obligations are changing so quickly. Just make sure that you have a route, making sure that you keep up to date with everything as it's happening.
Excellent.
Whatever that route is, keep up to date. You have to.
And one way you can do that is, of course, getting the CIPP regular updates.
Absolutely, it is. Yes, daily or weekly news emails.
Yes, they come into my inbox, so I know them well.
Yes, and LinkedIn as well. So we post a lot on LinkedIn to keep everybody up to date.
Fantastic. I will put a link to Helen's LinkedIn profile on the episode notes as well, if anyone wants to follow those articles. With the benefits of hindsight, what would be the one career decision you would change?
Hindsight's wonderful. So now, with that benefit of hindsight, genuinely none.
That's nice.
There could well have been a point in my career where I thought, what am I doing here? But like everybody else, I think in the revenue, no one thinks when they're a child, I know I want to be a tax collector when I grow up. And I became a tax collector while I worked out what I really wanted to do. But if I hadn't joined the revenue, I wouldn't be at the CIPP now, because that's a direct link. And so, I have to say, no
I would say, speaking on your behalf, I think you exude effervescence. You clearly enjoy what you do, which is great to see. You're clearly very passionate about it, and it's lovely. It's good. Good. If you had the power of foresight and you could change the entire payroll industry with one action or improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
I think I might be a little bit controversial now.
Oh, we like controversy. That's good.
It depends which way you look at it. If I had that magic wand and could start doing that, I would align tax and national insurance. And better men than me have looked at it, tried and failed, taken it out of the cupboard, had to play with it and thought, no, it's too hard, and put it back in. But, you're giving me like utopia now. So I would rip the rule book up and I would start again with tax and national insurance.
So, devil's advocate, could it be done?
Several people have tried. What they've tried to soften the edges of the existing rules and try to make them fit with each other. And every time they try to do that, they realise it ain't going to happen, and they put it back in the cupboard. It can happen if put the rule book and start again. But that would be a fundamental change, and it's whether there's the will to do that on both sides, to be honest.
No, it'll be a lot of work, but sometimes we need that, right?
Absolutely.
So, if I asked you, if the HMRC came to you and said, right, we are on the fence here, we are considering ripping up the rule book and starting again, it's going to be a huge amount of work for you, of course, especially at the CIPP, a huge amount of work for us, but we can start again. What would you say?
I would say, let me consult my members and see what they say.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, turned off politician.
What would you want if you're representing your view within the membership?
My view would be, well, let's look at it. Let's see exactly what the repercussions would be if we were to re-put the rule book. Is the ripple effect just too significant?
Sure.
And even though it can be a nightmare trying to align the tax rules and the NIC rules, that might be better than the huge tidal wave that we got if we ripped it up.
So you're still concerned about your members here. I can see that, which is a good thing.
But even so, because this has been an issue for everybody for so long, but we've never been given the opportunity to see what it could look like, what the implications would be in the interim and what the final result would look like. So I think that we'd need to have a proper look at it, work out what the repercussions would be, but what the final result would be, and then decide, should we go down that route, or actually, now, looking at that, what we've got ain't so bad after all.
Sure. No, fair enough. We'll watch this space. Maybe we'll meet again in 5 years' time and we'll see what's happened. We'll see how it's moved. Maybe it'll be combined at that time. I'm sure technology will look very different anyway at that point. Who motivates you and why?
What motivates me is that passion, enthusiasm, commitment that payroll people show for their profession. You saw last night.
Yeah.
Alistair McGowan.
He was brilliant, by the way.
He absolutely was. And he looked taken by the enthusiasm and the passion that everybody has for payroll. How can you not be motivated by that?
Maybe I'll change the question slightly then. So why do you love payroll so much?
I like numbers.
Okay.
I like coming to an answer that it's either right or it's wrong.
It's logical.
Absolutely. I like that. But ultimately, why wouldn't you like giving someone money? Why wouldn't you want to do that?
I think the bit I would like, because I'm not a payroll professional, I also recruit for payroll people, is I just like to see what everyone's earning all the time. I'd like the curiosity side of it. I'd like to work for a football club. That's what I'd like to do. And see what Sergio Aguero and people like that are getting each week and just enjoy it. That's what I would like. But hey, that's why I do recruitment and not payroll, probably. If you didn't work in payroll, what would you be doing?
Well, my dream job would be a dog walker.
Oh, okay.
That's what
So you must have dogs at home?
I have dogs at home, but I also live at the top of a very big hill in the middle of the Pennines where it's very often wet and windy. Being a dog walker in wet and windy ain't good. So my dream job would be a dog walker somewhere nice, warm and sunny.
What dog do you have?
I've got 2 Shelties.
What are they called?
Baby lassies. One's called Hope and one's called Sky.
Fantastic.
They're my babies.
Brilliant. Well, listen, that brings us to a close, Helen. So thank you ever so much for joining us on the Payroll Podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will put some links to your LinkedIn profile if I may. I'll obviously put some links to the CIPP. If you are listening and you're not familiar with them, and then we have some international listeners here as well. So I'll put some links there. We did have a number of international bodies joining us at the awards, with the American Payroll Association here, with the Canadian Payroll Association, the Irish Payroll Association, Australian Payroll Association, of course. So if you are an international listener, then I'll put some of those links in the episode notes as well, so you can check out the bodies of the other international payroll associations as well. But otherwise, just a huge thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking to everyone again on the next episode in a couple of weeks.
It's been a pleasure, Nick. Thanks, you.
Helen.
You've been listening to the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist payroll recruiters. If you would like to feature on a future podcast, please contact us. For a wealth of world-class payroll content, please visit us at jgarecruitment.com. See you next week.